The old woman's groceries hit the pavement at 4:47 in the afternoon, and nobody moved. Not the man in the SUV who'd clipped her cart. Not the teenager on his phone near the cart return. Not the two women who'd been watching from the moment it happened. The bag split. Oranges rolled toward the drain. A carton of eggs landed face down, and everyone in that parking lot found something else to look at. Everyone except Nolan. He was 23 years old, wearing a jacket with a torn left pocket and boots that had seen 2 Canadian winters too many. He worked the overnight stock shift at the grocery store behind them, had until 3 weeks ago when the assistant manager decided the store needed to restructure. He'd been there 4 years. He'd been let go in 11 minutes. He had a job interview in 45 minutes across town. He was already cutting it close. He picked up the oranges anyway. He didn't think about it. That was the thing nobody understood about Nolan. He didn't calculate kindness. He just did it. The way some people scratch their arm without noticing. He crouched down on the cold asphalt and gathered the fruit back into the bag that was still intact, and then he looked up and saw the woman properly for the first time. She was maybe 75. Small, with white hair pinned back and a winter coat that had been good quality once, maybe 15 years ago. She was trying very hard not to cry, and the trying was the worst part of it. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her purse, which had spilled too, and she kept looking at the egg carton like if she stared at it long enough, the damage might reverse itself. Here, Nolan said, don't worry about the eggs. I used to work here. I know where the mop is. She looked at him the way a lot of people looked at him, like she was trying to decide something. I'm not going to steal your purse, he said quietly, no edge in it, just fact. She laughed, a short surprised sound. I know you're not, she said. I'm sorry, it's been a day. Yeah, he said, me too. Her name was Eleanor Fitch. She told him that while he was helping her get the remaining bags onto the cart, and she told him she lived 6 blocks north, and that her son was supposed to have driven her today, but something had come up, as things always seemed to come up for her son lately. She didn't say it bitterly, just plainly, the way people describe weather. Nolan looked at his watch. He looked at Eleanor Fitch and her cart in the 6 blocks north. He texted the interview coordinator, running a few minutes behind, very sorry, I'll be there. Then he pushed the cart. She tried to protest. He shook his head once, and something in the quiet certainty of it settled her. They walked together through the gray November afternoon, Eleanor asking questions and Nolan answering them honestly, which was something he did more naturally than most people found comfortable. Yes, he'd been laid off. No, he didn't have another job yet. The interview was for a position at a logistics company, warehouse coordinator. He'd been studying supply chain management online for 2 years, picking up courses between shifts, paying for them slowly, one at a time. You studied while you were stocking shelves at night? Eleanor said. Shelves don't need a lot of conversation, Nolan said. She smiled at that. They reached her building. He carried the bags to the lobby, and that was where it should have ended. A small moment, the kind that doesn't make the news, the kind that just makes the day fractionally better for 2 strangers and then dissolves. Except that was the moment the 3 men came around the corner. Nolan heard them before he saw them. Loud with that specific energy that takes up more space than it needs to. They were somewhere between 30 and 40, and one of them, the one in the red cap, was already looking at Eleanor's bags with the lazy interest of someone calculating whether the effort is worth it. It wasn't an unfamiliar energy. Nolan had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to read that energy early. Redcap said something to Eleanor, something low enough that Nolan only caught the tone, not the words. Eleanor's hand tightened on her purse strap. Nolan stepped forward. Not aggressively, not with posturing. He just placed himself between Eleanor and the 3 men with the calm deliberateness of someone moving a piece on a board. She's good, he said. Redcap looked at him. The look was the kind designed to make people feel small. Nolan had spent 23 years being made to feel small by various systems and people and circumstances, and somewhere along the way he had simply stopped cooperating with that project. He met the look with nothing. Not defiance, not fear. Just presence. Mind your business, Redcap said. This is my business, Nolan said. Later, people would ask him what happened next, and the truth was that it didn't take long. Less than 15 seconds of tension, of the 3 men measuring something in Nolan's face and not finding what they were looking for. before Redcap made a sound that was supposed to be dismissive, and the three of them moved on. No fight, no drama. Eleanor had her hand on her chest. Are you all right? Nolan asked. Yes, she said. She didn't sound entirely sure. Thank you, thank you. Get inside, he said, not unkindly. Lock the lobby door. He waited until he heard it click. Then he ran. He made the interview with 4 minutes to spare. His heart was still beating slightly too fast when he sat down across from the woman who would be interviewing him. Her name was Joanna Wexford, mid-50s, efficient manner, the kind of person who had no time for performance and significant time for competence. She looked at his resume. She looked at him. 4 years in overnight stock, she said, and you have a supply chain certificate. Working on the second module, Nolan said, should finish in March. Why logistics? He thought about Eleanor Fitch's oranges rolling toward the drain. He thought about the way a small breakdown in a system, one inattentive driver, one badly positioned cart, could unravel somebody's entire afternoon, maybe their entire week. Because things getting from one place to another matters, he said, and most of the time, nobody's watching the people who make that happen. Joanna Wexford wrote something down. He didn't get the job that day. He got a call back a week later and a second interview, and on the 3rd week of December, he got an offer letter. Entry-level but real, with benefits and room to grow. He sat in his apartment, which was a bachelor unit above a Vietnamese restaurant, and read the letter twice before he allowed himself to believe it. He hadn't thought about Eleanor Fitch in a while. There was no reason he should have. It had been a small thing. He had moved on. But Eleanor Fitch had not forgotten Nolan. She had, in fact, spent several days trying to find him. It wasn't easy. She knew his first name because she'd asked. She knew he'd worked at the grocery store. When she went back and spoke to the manager, she was told he'd been let go and they couldn't share contact information. She left her number. She wasn't sure anyone would pass it along. What she had not told Nolan in their 6-block walk was who her late husband had been. Raymond Fitch had spent 31 years building a trucking and logistics company in southern Ontario, one of the mid-sized ones, the kind that keeps food on shelves and building materials on job sites and medical equipment in hospitals without anyone particularly noticing. He had died 4 years ago and left the company to Eleanor and their daughter Vivienne. Vivienne ran it now. Eleanor sat on the board and attended meetings and, as she told her daughter, tried not to be in the way. The week after the parking lot, Eleanor told Vivienne what had happened. Vivienne listened without interrupting, which was how she listened to everything. Complete attention, no editorial. When her mother finished, she was quiet for a moment. He studied supply chain while working nights, Vivienne said. That's what he told me. And he just stepped up without being asked. Without hesitating, Eleanor said, that's the part. He didn't calculate it. Vivienne looked at her. What's his last name? Eleanor had his first name and the name of the grocery store and the description of a torn pocket and worn boots, and that turned out to be enough. Nolan found out about it the way most things happened in his life, unexpectedly on a Tuesday. His phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and a woman's voice introduced herself as Vivienne Fitch of Fitch Transport and asked if he had a few minutes. He was standing in the parking lot of his new job. He sat down on a concrete divider. My mother said she met you outside Lakeview Foods in November, Vivienne said. She said you helped her home and then stood between her and 3 men who were giving her trouble. Nolan was quiet for a second. I remember, he said. Is she all right? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Later, Vivienne would tell her husband that was the moment, not any of the other moments, when she knew she'd been right to call. She's fine, Vivienne said. She wanted me to find you because she wanted to say thank you properly. But I'm also calling for another reason. She told him about the position. It was a coordinator role, inventory and distribution, based in Hamilton, real salary, real responsibility. The person they'd had in the role had left suddenly, and they needed someone who understood how systems worked from the ground level, not just from a classroom. I hear you're working on your supply chain certificate, Vivienne said. Howdy, he stopped. He understood. Eleanor had listened to all of it. We'd want you to finish it, Vivienne said. We'd pay for it. Nolan looked at the parking lot, at the gray December sky. Why, he said, you don't know me. My mother knows you, Vivienne said. And my mother is an excellent judge of character. She has been for 76 years. He asked for a week to think about it. He didn't need a week. He needed about 4 hours, but he wanted to be sure he wasn't making a decision from desperation. When he called Vivian back, he had written down 3 questions about the role that were specific and operational, and she answered all 3 without consulting anyone, and that was how he knew it was real. He started in January. The first weeks were steep. He knew the theory but the reality of coordinating a distribution network. The variables, the human elements, the way a delayed shipment in one node could ripple through 6 others, was different from reading about it. He made mistakes. He admitted them quickly and fixed them faster, and that turned out to matter enormously in that particular workplace. An older dispatcher named Claude, who had been with Fitch Transport for 19 years and had seen coordinators come and go with the casual indifference of someone who'd watched a lot of weather, watched Nolan for 2 weeks before saying anything directly to him. Then one morning Claude stopped beside his desk and said, without preamble, "You're not going to last." Nolan looked up. "Okay." "Not because you're bad at this," Claude said, "because you're going to get promoted before you can." He said it without warmth, because Claude said most things without warmth, and walked away. By March, Nolan had finished his second certificate module. By April, he had implemented a small change to the intake logging system that saved the dispatch team roughly 4 hours per week. He didn't announce it. He just did it, tested it quietly, showed Claude first because Claude would find the flaws without ego, and then brought it to Vivian. Vivian looked at it for a long time. "How long did this take you?" she said. "About 3 weeks in the evenings." She looked at him with the same quality of attention her mother had, the same sense of someone measuring not performance but character. "Nolan," she said, "what do you want in 5 years?" He didn't look away. "To run something," he said, "properly. The kind of thing where the people doing the night work know that someone above them actually knows what the night work costs." Vivian nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "let's figure out how to get there." Eleanor came to the Hamilton office once in the spring. She brought butter tarts from a bakery in the West End because that was what Eleanor did. She brought things, showed up with food, made spaces feel inhabited rather than occupied. She found Nolan at his desk during his lunch break, eating a sandwich and looking at shipping data with the concentration of someone who was actually interested in it. She sat down across from him without ceremony. "You look better than November," she said. "November was a hard month," he said. "I'm sorry about the eggs," she said, which made no sense out of context and perfect sense in it. He laughed. "A real one. You didn't drop them." "No," she said, "but I spent a long time being upset about them and not about the right things." She folded her hands on the desk. "I want to ask you something, and you can tell me to mind my own business." "Okay." "Why did you stay? To help me home? You were going to miss your interview." Nolan thought about it. He gave it the real consideration it deserved. "Because you were someone's grandmother," he said finally, "and whoever that person is, they'd want to know someone stayed." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "My granddaughter is 8, she said. "Her name is Mira." "Tell Mira her grandmother handles herself well under pressure," he said. Eleanor smiled. It was the kind of smile that takes a while to arrive, the kind that means something. She left him with a butter tart and went to find Vivian. At the door, she paused. "Nolan," she said, "Raymond would have liked you." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "Thank you," and meant it without quite knowing all the reasons why. The story got out in the way local stories do, gradually, incompletely, passed between people until it accreted enough detail to seem complete. A journalist at a regional paper heard it from someone at the distribution company's annual supplier meeting, and she ran a small piece in February, the kind that gets shared quietly rather than loudly, the kind that people send to their daughters and their nephews with no caption, just the link. The headline was modest. The story underneath it was not. By the time spring came, Nolan had stopped being surprised when people mentioned it. He still found it slightly uncomfortable, not the story itself, but the way people wanted it to be a kind of magic, a transaction, a proof that goodness is rewarded. He understood the appeal. He just didn't think it was the right lesson. The right lesson, as far as he could tell, was simpler and harder. Eleanor's bags had been on the ground and her hands were shaking, and he had been in a hurry and it hadn't mattered. That was all. Not because he'd calculated a reward, not because he'd known who she was, not because someone was watching. He'd picked up the oranges because they were on the ground. And he'd stood between her and those men because she was alone. That was it. That was the whole story, underneath all the other story. The things that define who you are rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with music or a dramatic pause. They happen at 4:47 on a gray afternoon in a parking lot when you're already late, already tired, already carrying more than you're showing. They happen in the small gap between what's convenient and what's right. And most people, not bad people, just people, choose convenient. Nolan chose differently. Not once, but as a habit, which is the only way it ever really counts. And somewhere in Hamilton, a woman named Mira will grow up hearing the story of the November afternoon her grandmother's bags hit the ground, and about the young man who stopped when no one else did. Maybe she'll think it's a nice story. Maybe it'll just be a thing that happened to someone she loves. Or maybe, someday, in some other parking lot in some other city, when she's in a hurry and something small goes wrong in front of her, she'll remember it without remembering where she learned it. And she'll stop. That's how it works. Not headlines, not rewards, not national news. Just one person, watching when nobody else is, doing the thing that costs them something, planting something they'll never see grow. I keep thinking about the oranges rolling toward the drain. Not the job offer. Not the headline, not any of the things that came after. Just that specific image, a gray November afternoon, a parking lot, and a young man in a torn jacket who was already late, already tired, already carrying something heavy, crouching down to pick up fruit that wasn't his problem. That's where it started, not with a decision, with a reflex. I think that's the part we get wrong when we tell stories like Nolan's. We frame them as choices, as if he stood there and weighed the options and selected the noble path. But that's not how it works for people who have genuinely built something inside themselves. For them, it isn't a choice any more than breathing is a choice. It's just who they are, showing up before the mind has time to negotiate. That's what character actually is. Not what you decide to do when the stakes are clear. What you do when you're in a hurry and nobody's keeping score. Nolan had 3 things working in him that afternoon, and I don't think any of them arrived by accident. The first was integrity. Not the poster on the wall kind, but the kind that's been worn smooth by years of doing the quiet right thing in rooms where no one was watching. 4 years of overnight shifts. 2 years of online courses paid for one at a time. He knew what it cost to show up, and he showed up anyway, and that shapes a person in ways that are invisible until they're suddenly very visible. The second was intelligence, and I don't mean grades or certificates, though those matter. I mean the kind of intelligence that reads a situation clearly without panic. Nolan looked at those 3 men and didn't perform toughness. He just placed himself between Eleanor and the problem and stayed steady. That's a specific skill. It comes from paying attention, from understanding how people work, from having spent enough time at the bottom of systems to know exactly how they function. He understood the logistics of that moment the same way he later understood the logistics of a distribution network. Things that get from one place to another, he'd said. He always knew where the pressure points were. The third thing, and maybe the hardest one to build, was resilience. The kind that doesn't announce itself. He'd been laid off 11 minutes after 4 years. He didn't collapse. He sent a polite text, ran to his interview, and picked up the pieces without making it anyone else's burden. That's not toughness in the loud sense. That's the quiet endurance of someone who has decided, somewhere along the way, that circumstances don't get to write the ending. Those 3 things together, the integrity, the sharpness, the endurance, they don't guarantee anything. Life isn't a ledger, but they put you in position. They make you the kind of person who, when a small moment arrives in a gray parking lot, responds in a way that opens a door you couldn't have predicted. Eleanor didn't help Nolan because she owed him. She helped him because she recognized something. And Vivian called because her mother had been watching people for 76 years and knew what she was seeing. You can't manufacture that recognition. You can only be, consistently and quietly, the kind of person who earns it. The oranges were on the ground. He picked them up. That's the whole story.